어데 아니 빨리 주주 다네 베제타시벤 도들이
As usual, we'll have the recitation in Pali,
다 사주신데
the
그도
Mangala Sutra,
나베 그도리아 또 당부디 베제 빨리 기슈나로 그게 되는 수 그도 나셔지기 간다
So when
빨리
the teaching
주주지
of the Buddha was compiled,
멍시 차리기 어래
it was compiled first in Pali, and Pali tradition is the foundation of the teaching of
빨리
the
주주나
Buddha.
버즈 오 yes
And then the Sanskrit tradition of the teaching, from which we'll recite the Heart Sutra, So from India, the Sanskrit traditions spread to China, Vietnamese, Korea, Japan, and Tibet, and so forth. So the first day we'll have recitation in Pali and Sanskrit. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vijjācarana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhamma sarati saddha deva manussanam buddho bhagavati swakhato bhagavata dhammo sandidhiko akaliko ehipasiko panahiko pajjatang veditambo viññoriti supatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho.
Happy 31st Kala Chakra. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Dudiyampi
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. 자, 고소 멤버시잖아. 무시 직접 이제 야야다. 빨리 다시
So we have the recitation, or we have the recitation of the Mangala Sutra in Pali. So perhaps during the time of the Buddha himself, this must have also been recited. In the Theravada countries like Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos and so forth also follow mainly the Pali tradition, and they have very excellent practice of the perfection of the Vinaya, the monastic discipline. Of course, there are few who may misbehave even within these traditions, but on the whole, they have very good practice of Vinaya. So when I first visited Thailand, there was an old Thera. The Sangaraja, that one passed away, and then there's a second one also who was really good and who was really inspiring faith. Who had inspired faith in me, and he also had passed away. And I received the picture of that Sangaraja, which really I had a special feeling. And then we had from children, these school children, reciting the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit. This is the first time. So with regard to the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism, it first went from India to China, from where it spread to Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and then another strand of the Sanskrit tradition spread from India to Tibet, from where it spread to outer in Inner Mongolia, and then also within the republics, within republics of Kalmykia, Tuva, Buryatia, within the Russian Federation. So when these children recited the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit, I felt that in this language, Sanskrit, so since the compilation on the Buddhist councils where the teachings of the Buddha were gathered, it's been maybe over 2,000 years or so. So with the Pali as a foundational teaching, then we have the Sanskrit tradition, which is based on reason and logic to establish the profound meanings, the essential meanings of the teaching of the Buddha through logic. And Buddhism first originated in India, and then there was a decline in it, and today, now we have, over the recent times, we have people taking more interest in the teaching of the Buddha, and today we had some children reciting the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit. So the teaching of the Buddha, which has been it's been 2,600 years or so. So it's like today with these recitations, it's like we are reviving. I mean, the Buddhism is being reborn, almost like. So I felt a mixed feeling of sadness and happiness. So, having the children having recited the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit, now, of course, in the Tibetan tradition, we also have the study of the Sanskrit, I learned it from my late tutor, Ling Rinpoche. But as Tibetans now, we don't have to resort to Sanskrit as such, thanks to the great master Abbot Chandrakshita, who established the teaching of the Buddha on the Tibetan soil. And in order for it to flourish well, then, because the monastic community is considered very important, we had the first 7 Tibetan children who were tested whether they could keep the Vinaya vows or not, and then they were ordained by Chandrakshita, who was himself a great philosopher and also a logician. And so, with regard to his philosophical system, he followed the Madhyamaka, the middle way philosophy. And then the way he taught Madhyamaka was by using logic and reasoning. After Dignaga and Dharmakirti, the study of epistemology and logic and reasoning was continued by Chandrakshita, and then his student Kamalashila also served in the establishment of Buddhism on the Tibetan soil. And so, since we have the Tibetan language itself, Chandrakshita and advised the Tibetans to have the teachings of the Buddha in our own language, Tibetan, without having to resort to Sanskrit. And so we have over 100 volumes of the Kanjur, the translations, and then there are over 200 volumes of the Tenjur. And so we are going to recite this Heart Sutra in Tibetan as well.
다 시로님 그다 юм전지 뒤숨 다 가다 юм세 주든세.
So with regard to the Heart Sutra, we have the extensive, the middle length, and then also the short versions of Perfection Wisdom. And so there's also the 84,000, I mean, 14,000, 18,000 verses, and so forth. And within these Perfect Wisdom teachings, the content are those of the explicit content of emptiness and implicit content of the progression along the path, such as the 6 perfections and 10 perfections, and then also those of the Bodhisattva paths and the resultant state of Buddhahood, the qualities such as the 4 fearlessnesses and 10 powers and so forth. And so these serve as the basis for establishing emptiness. And so it mentions that the Perfect Wisdom teachings mention that all these are empty. Therefore, when commenting on these teachings of the Perfection of Wisdom, Master Nagarjuna, commenting on the explicit content, he wrote the 6 texts of reasoning and so forth were written by the other masters. So having the experience and having really tasted this teaching of emptiness, so that the fact that we are able to make, like shake our negative emotions, causing fear to them, is thanks to Master Nagarjuna's teachings on emptiness. And then regarding the implicit content of the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, we have Abhisamaya Alamkara by Maitreya and so forth. Abhisamaya Alamkara and others, as well as masters like Asanga and his brother, who followed that tradition of the extensive conduct lineage. And we have the commentaries on the Abhisamaya Alamkara, known as the Clear Meaning commentary by Haribhadra. And so those who study Abhisamaya, pursue the study of Perfection of Wisdom and Parchin, base themselves on this commentary by Haribhadra. So we recite, therefore, the verses of salutation from Abhisamaya Alamkara, a verse of salutation from Abhisamaya Alamkara, and also Master Nagarjuna's salutation verses from Mula Madhyamaka Karika. This is what we are going to do. 한계 대제 나와 종가 원매버 깨매버 차바매버 땅매버 원매버 점매버 다제되네 대제네 저반에 시시는 저외 상계는 담바달라 차텔로 다시는 가도 To you, who is supreme speaker among all fully enlightened Buddhas, among all teachers, I pay homage to you. For inconceivable hundreds of eons. So, whatever Dharma discourse we do, as I said earlier, the other day, it's important to turn the Dharma into Dharma practice, make the Dharma Dharma, and particularly in accordance with the perfection of wisdom teachings, we are doing this Dharma discourse. And therefore, we'll do the practice of taking refuge and also cultivate this spirit of enlightenment, bodhicitta, in order to bring benefits to all sentient beings who are as infinite as the expanse of space. All of us want happiness and not suffering, and then happiness should come by subduing our mind, disciplining our mind, and not from outside, but from within ourselves. And therefore, we should have a very good altruistic sense of altruism, and not just blindly following this kind of practice blindly, but by using our intelligence. So the verse that we are going to say says that it's is about taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, where we say, I take refuge in the Buddha, to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. And then the next two lines show the spirit of enlightenment, in which we say that through the practices of generosity and so forth, and accumulating merit and wisdom, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And therefore, if you have a good understanding of how to go about with the practice of the teaching of the Buddha, just by reciting this verse, you'll have the idea as to how you should think. And so sometimes in this prayer, we say that may through the accumulation of merit, by giving and so forth, may I become enlightened. So here we are only mentioning merit and not the other aspect of the practice, which is the wisdom. So with regard to the wisdom part, as unlike that of the altruistic path, we come across, with regard to that, we come across the term I in these lines. And so if you think through, of course, this I does exist. It's not that when we say there is no self, it doesn't mean that it's non-existent. We're not talking about nihilism. But we have a notion of an I, which is right here in the center of the body, solidly reciting. Whatever prayers and Ready Yoga practices and so forth we do, such as practices like accumulating wealth and so forth, we have this sense of I, a strong sense of I, as if it's somewhere here in the center of the body. And so, when we come across the word I in the prayer, we should always remind ourselves of the fact that this I, which appears to me, which is the appearance of it, does not exist. And so, I usually say this verse from Mula Madhyamaka Karika, where it says that Tathagata is neither the aggregates nor different from it, and the Tathagata is not in the aggregates nor the aggregates in it, and Tathagata does not possess the aggregates. And so I switch the Tathagata to myself, saying, I am neither the aggregates nor the aggregates that separate from it, and so forth. And in this way, it really helps me to gain an insight into the selflessness, emptiness. And so when you recite these lines, you should also be able to feel inspired to have this insight into emptiness while when you come across this I. And so whatever practice of Dharma you do, it should be complemented or imbued with the sense of taking refuge and the spirit of enlightenment, coupled with that of the wisdom of emptiness. And so, just as we have the tradition, let's recite this verse to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. I take refuge until I'm enlightened. Through the practice of, through the accumulation of merit and wisdom by giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. To the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. Through the accumulation of merit and wisdom by giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. This is said three times. So all the gods and titans and so forth come forth to listen to this teaching of the Buddha, which is like a nectar to the ear, and it dispels all the suffering and the negative emotions from within our mind's stream. So I'll teach in the languages of the humans and gods, asuras, and so forth. So this text that I recited says that the teaching of the Buddha dispels all the suffering of all the disease of negative emotions. And so whether we have happiness or not depends on whether we are able to discipline our mind or not. And so the text says the thing along this, the thing about this meaning, the meaning of this teaching. So in the tradition of Kono Lama Rinpoche Tenzin Gyaltsen, who received many teachings, most of his teachings from masters in Kham, and so in his tradition he said praise from of the Buddha, a verse of praise to the Buddha. He would recite verses from different texts like Sutra Mahayana, Sutra Alamkara, and so forth. Every day he would recite different texts, different verses. But I usually recite this one verse, which is homage to the Buddha, the Gautama, who, moved by his compassion, taught the sacred Dharma to rid us of negative emotions, distorted views. So how is the translation going on for you in the different languages? Chinese is okay.
Then
Vietnamese and Korean.
Okay. English translation.
Is it coming through well? Russian? Just give a thumbs up if you are getting the signal well. And then Mongolians, are you able to hear well? Spanish,
translation.
French, Japanese.
Okay. Yeah.
So the other day, when we had the taking care of the disciples ceremony, of course, not everyone was here. Of course, Kalachakra initiation is full of blessing. Of course, it's sacred. But the real practical means of making transformation within ourselves I could make a distinction between these two categories of the teaching of the Buddha. One is the general structure, and the other is the specifically tailored teaching. According to Nyangun Sungrapa. And so the structure, the Sutrayana, comes within the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha, whereas Master Nagarjuna's Dorje and Dose, and then the 5 stages and so forth are the teachings pertaining to the specifically tailored teachings. And so the tantric teachings were taught according to the mental dispositions of the disciples, the individual disciples, as well as the constituent factors of their nerve systems, or the nadis and chakras and bindus and so forth. And regarding these, there is difference between Kala Chakra tradition system and then the Samaja and Heruka systems. And so accordingly, we have the different tantric teachings. And then we have the 5 Buddha families, according to which the disciples, during the procedure of giving the initiation in the mandala rite, and particularly the practice of completion stage, I mean, there are differences as well. And so these are specifically tailored for individuals. And sometimes the Buddha arose in the form of the main deity, who is a bhikshu, a monk, in the form of a monk. But in most cases, that's not the case. But the Buddha arose in the form of some deity, the chief deity of the mandala. So usually I'm frank, and I say that, of course, the Buddhism, the tantric teaching really spread widely in Tibet. But in order for an effective practice of the Tantra, we should be able to do that and practice based on and grounded in the general structure, Sutrayana practice, the bodhicitta and the wisdom of emptiness. So if you have a good understanding of the wisdom of emptiness, or the view of emptiness, whether it's according to the Madhyamaka or Chittamatra view, a philosophical view, then if you do tantric practice, it would be good. Otherwise, without any understanding of the view of emptiness, just doing some deity yoga will not mean much. So sometimes people say that, according to the Sutrayana, it takes 3 countless eons to get to Buddhahood, and that's too tiring. And then they say that, according to the highest Yoga Tantra, you can become enlightened within a short period of time, such as one lifetime, and in one body, and then also others. So Son is telling the people, the organizers, to leave the media people where they are. They will just keep taking pictures and so forth. It doesn't matter. So they have freedom. So in any case, they need to take pictures. And so if they could get good shots, it would be better, wouldn't it? And so otherwise, they would have to go to some corner and take picture, and may not get good shots. So we have to really pay attention, serious attention, to the general structure of the teaching. As I have been saying this, and many of you may have heard, we need to be 21st century Buddhists. Why do I say this? Is because in the past we have rather been thinking that we were fortunate, and because the teaching of the Buddha spread the length and breadth of the land of Tibet snows. and we were taking it for granted. And therefore, we were not doing much analysis, investigation into the teaching. But today we are in the 21st century, and of course, educational standards is improving, and therefore we are at a time when we need to really check the reality of things. And even with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, we need to scrutinize it, as the Buddha himself has actually permitted us to do so, when he said, "O monks and scholars, just as the gold is tested by cutting, rubbing, and burning, likewise you should examine my teaching and accept it, not because you have devotion or faith in me." And so, masters of Nalanda, like the Nagarjuna, and his followers, such as Chandrakirti, who in his Madhyamaka Avatara says that sutras such as these should not be taken literally, and these. And therefore, after doing scrutiny into the teaching of the Buddha, the masters like him have said that we cannot take such and such teachings literally, because it goes against reason. And so there's no other tradition in the whole of the world which actually says that the teaching of the founder himself must be put to the test of reasoning. And there is no other tradition within Buddhism itself, apart from the Nalanda tradition. And therefore, we need to study what the teaching of the Buddha is. What is the basis, the ground, the path, and the result, and so forth. As it is said, by understanding what the teaching of the Buddha is, may I gain certainty in the teacher. Gain conviction in the teacher. And therefore, the teaching of the Buddha, you should be able to gain conviction, and on the basis of that conviction and understanding of the teaching of the Buddha, bear faith in the teaching of the Buddha. This is how we should go about with the teaching. Otherwise, having received the Gachakra initiation, even if you may do tens of millions of the recitation of mantra and doing retreat, it may not be of much benefit. So I'm thinking of actually how to benefit you who have come to the teaching. And if you could also think of taking something that is beneficial for you, having come here. Therefore, I have decided to give the teaching on Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, the guide to the Bodhisattva way of life, and which focuses mainly on the equaling and exchanging self and others with regard to the spirit of enlightenment, and then also with the wisdom. It teaches the wisdom of emptiness. In the 9th chapter, the view of emptiness is taught rather briefly, but it's important for you to have a very broad understanding of the teaching of the Buddha. And therefore, the stages of meditation, the middle book, lays out how, what the basis of the teaching is, and then how to progress along the path and the grounds and the paths. And so it will help you to gain an understanding into the sequential nature of the practice of the Buddha's teaching. And therefore, I'm teaching by combining these two texts this time. I received the explanatory transmission of Bodhisattva Charya Avatara in this very place in Bodh Gaya from Kun Lama Rinpoche Tenzin Gyaltsen from Kinor, who received his teaching from his master in Kham. I don't remember the name of that teacher. And so I received the teaching on the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara from him. And then regarding the stages of the path, I received the transmission or explanatory transmission from Sakya Abbot, Sangye Tenzin Rinpoche. And so it was also here, I think, in Bodh Gaya. And I was having a chat with him, a conversation with him, and in our conversation it came out that he had received the transmission of this text when he was going on a pilgrimage in Samye. And he reached Samye. When he reached there, he found out that a Lama from Kham was teaching the Bhavana Krama, the stages of meditation, sitting on the throne from where Master Shandarakshita was said to have given teachings. So when he told me that he received this transmission, the explanatory transmission, I really felt that it's indispensable for me to receive the teaching as well. And so when we talk about making transformation within our mind, it won't happen just by listening to a teaching once, but you need to really think through, reflect on the teaching over and over again for years, decades, and so forth. And therefore, if you can have the text with you, it would be helpful and beneficial. Therefore, I have asked the organizing committee of the Kala Chakra teaching to publish the book. And so how many of you have these books in Tibetan? His Holiness is showing it in Tibetan. So most of the monks seems to have the book. And then the English. How many of you have it? Please raise the copy that you have, so His Holiness can see. So it seems not many of the people have the text. Oh yeah. So that I was just giving the reason why I wanted to give teaching on these texts. So sitting on this throne, I am here to introduce the teaching of the Buddha to you, and you are the audience of the teaching of the Buddha. Because I'm giving a Dharma teaching, a Dharma discourse, I'm sitting on the throne. Otherwise, we are all same as human beings, we are all same. All the 7 billion people are same. We were born the same way, and we are going to die the same way. And therefore, while we are alive, we have the negative emotions such as desire or attachment, anger or hatred and ignorance. But we also have naturally have the potential for cultivating and developing love, compassion, bodhicitta. And so we all don't want suffering, but want happiness. This was there even when we were in the embryo stage. And so all living beings, all sentient beings, including animals, birds, insects, and so forth, want happiness and not suffering. In our text, there's mention of the trichilocosm, and then the Rabjam, and the hugely vast world systems, the first, second, third, and so forth. And so, looking from our own experience, we know that all sentient beings within the whole of these kind of different world systems are same in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And so those who are gathered here also are same in wanting happiness and not suffering, and we are also same in having the negative emotions, attachment, anger, and so forth. And also we as human beings have this intelligence, that we are same in that respect as well. And therefore, when I teach, when I say something, it helps you. If you are somebody different from human beings, then when I share my experience and my knowledge, then if your basic mentality and the way of thinking and so forth are different, it may not be beneficial and helpful to you. For example, regarding Master Chandarakshita, he was someone who was combating his self-cherishing attitude and the grasping at true existence. And the teaching of the Buddha is such that, as it is said in this verse, we are not creating the causes for suffering, but creating the causes for developing the causes for happiness. So it's not about the teaching of the Buddha, that's not about because the teaching of the Buddha says so, but we want happiness, not suffering. And so the actions which give rise to suffering and happiness, I mean, whether you have happiness or not, I mean, or suffering, it depends on whether your mind is disciplined or not. And therefore, to discipline the mind, we have the teaching. And so, I mean, the teaching of the Buddha is different from other traditions in that respect. Of course, all traditions have the teaching are meant for making transformation within. But on the one hand, there are those traditions which are based mainly on faith to make transformation, whereas in Buddhism, what is said is the negative, destructive emotions are the factors which cause us to lose a peace of mind, a disturbance in our mind. So how these negative emotions arise within us and what are its antidotes, how to apply the antidote to them is shown in the teaching of the Buddha. And so from this it's different. And so all the 7 billion people are same in wanting happiness and not suffering. And from amongst these 7 billion, about 1 billion are non-believers. And then there are atheists who are negative towards the teachings, the religious traditions. And then there are, with regard to the believers in the religions, there are about 6 billion. Maybe. So on the whole, all of us are same in not wanting suffering, but wanting happiness. But a main cause of our happiness is love and compassion. And all of us, 7 billion people, were born from our mothers. And therefore, the love and compassion is something that is within ourselves by nature, biologically. So maybe some of you have not heard this. I have, for the last over 30 years, I've been having dialogues and discussions with scientists. And in some of the recent such meetings with scientists, some of the scientists have done some research, experiment with children, infants, maybe about 5-6 months old, to whom the scientists showed different pictures, movies, like animations. And so I was also in the discussion, in the panel. And so these children of 5-6 months old, pre-verbal children, babies, infants, so they have not much influence from outside yet. Maybe they see things, different things with their eyes, but they're basically not tainted by outside influence. And so the innate quality of the mind was still quite fresh, untainted, unblemished. And so when these scientists show this animation to such children, such infants, So in the animation, the scientists showed two children playing and laughing with each other and helping each other, being kind to each other. And when the infant saw the animation, the infant also expressed joy. I saw that. And then when this infant was shown another animation where one child was actually in the animation, one child was pushing some ball uphill, trying to push a ball uphill. And so while trying to push it uphill, then another child comes and helps the first child to push the ball up. And then the infant child who saw that in animation felt happy and joyous. And then in the second animation, when the first child was pushing the ball uphill, another child comes from the front and pushes it down the hill. And when that was shown to the infant child, the pre-verbal infant child, the infant child also had this negative expression on his face. Maybe he was thinking perhaps how bad that second child was, who was pushing it down. And so this shows that even an infant at that stage shows joy and happiness when some love and affection is shown, whereas when a negative thing is done, then the child does not feel joyous. And then some scientists also say that when you are constantly have fear and anger, or anxiety and anger and so forth, it actually weakens our immune system. And therefore, they say that when you are sustained by compassion, love, and affection, it actually helps the immune system to strengthen as well. And therefore, these scientists have said that the nature of the innate nature of the human beings is the basic nature of human beings is compassionate. And therefore, I felt, if that is the case, then there is some hope for us. And so, just as in the external world, when we have a seed sown in the ground, we need to put water and manure and so forth for it to grow. Likewise, we need to nurture this seed of compassion within ourselves. So it's not just that we have power or wealth and so forth, or someone who could speak nicely to others, but if you actually show love and compassion to others, they would also love you back and they also will trust you. And therefore, having that basic compassionate nature within ourselves as the seed, we should, through education and helping to use our intelligence, and we should be able to teach children, what is the benefit, advantage of developing compassion further. And if you practice, if you are angry and so forth, what is the disadvantage of that? We're not talking about past or future lives or liberation and so forth, but in this very life, as human beings, we need to live together in our human community. So today, this is the reality. In the past, for example, in Vasubandhu's Abhidhamma Kushakarika, he mentions the 6 continents, which doesn't mention Europe or America or Africa and so forth, but so the world, at that time, people were living in separate communities, independently of one another. But today, that's not the case. Whether it's economically or even environmentally, we are living as one human community. If something goes wrong in one continent, it affects the rest of the continents of the world. So that's the reality. And therefore, since this is the case, we need to have a sense of oneness of human beings today. In reality, our future happiness, a happy future, must be achieved by living together. Otherwise, if we live in divisions, divided, and amongst others, that doesn't really fit the reality, today's reality as well. So it's not some kind of a poetry that we are talking about when we say all sentient beings. So of course, when we say, oh, may all sentient beings have happiness, of course the other world systems we may not have much to do, that connection. And then even in this world, with regard to the sentient beings, we cannot do much for other sentient beings, like animals, birds, and so forth. And then most of the problems in this world are created by our human beings, Of course, we complain about mosquitoes, but mosquitoes, you cannot combat war against mosquitoes as such. But the troubles in the world today are caused by human beings because of using this human intelligence as a servant of, the factor for using our negative emotions to destroy others. So we make divisions, thinking them and us, and religion-wise, race-wise, and also economically, we make division between rich and poor and so forth. And then, because of that division that we create, we also kill each other. If we leave the things as it is today, and then our prayer saying, "May all sentient beings have happiness," is just a lip service, and it's actually a lie. If you remain indifferent to what's happening in the world, people are being killed in different parts of the world, and if you remain indifferent to that, you are lying. And therefore, if we could do something for people to gain more, pay more attention to take interest in the love and compassion. Of course, we cannot do it. It would be good, not through some religious tradition, but through a secular means, by using scientific findings, as I already talked about, the findings of scientists, and having our love and compassion, having its positive effect on health. And if you live in a compassionate community, you as an individual will be happy, and a family will be happy, and students and teachers will be also happy with each other. And so the teacher would be respected by his students, and because of the compassionate nature of the teacher. Otherwise, if the teacher is someone who abuses his children, the students also might try to find devious means how to deceive their teacher. And therefore, love and compassion is the root of our happiness. If a couple is loving and compassionate to one another, they both will be happy. Otherwise, with lots of suspicion, jealousy, and so forth, they will not be happy at all. And therefore, love and compassion is the root of happiness. So when we say someone is our enemy, right from the beginning, at birth, that person wasn't our enemy. But because the person did something that made you dislike them, therefore, they become enemies or adversaries. And therefore, so you are also involved in their action that you disliked, and therefore, so you should make a distinction here regarding this love and compassion that we are talking about here. It is this unbiased unbiased love and compassion, which means love and compassion which is not tinged by our attachment. Whereas when we have love towards our near and dear ones, like our relatives and so forth, we say, oh, that person is nice to me, kind to me, and therefore I like him. And there is this tinge of attachment towards the person. Whereas an enemy, of course, is causing you a problem, may dislike you, but generating compassion towards that enemy, thinking that that person also is same like me in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And so this is the kind of love and compassion that we are emphasizing, this unbiased. What is the advantage of this kind of, if you have this, what is the disadvantage if you don't have it? And if you could actually introduce these to the children right from the beginning, if we could give education on love and compassion like that in school system, we could perhaps have children who grew up in this kind of environment, loving, compassionate environment, unlike us. So, of course, love and compassion, we have the seed for compassion within ourselves, but it's not nurtured as the children are given education. The existing education system itself does not have a place yet for that kind of education of love and compassion. And therefore, the education is more materialistically oriented one. And therefore, the children growing up in this kind of environment also have a materialistic way of life. And materialistic way of life. And they only think of material development, material gain, and so forth. So the material development, material advancements could help us to have sensory gratification, more or less sensory gratification, and that is what most people actually pay attention to, listening to some beautiful music or seeing some beautiful sights and having tasting, finding gratification from the alcohol and drugs and so forth, and then the touch, which includes sex. So these kind of experiences based on sensory perception are considered important, but they are very transitory. So if you watch a football match, people show lots of joy, but when the show is gone, when the tournament is over, that joy is gone. What we need to find is a stable joy and happiness without, so that you have a satisfaction not based on this kind of sensorial gratification, but using our own mind itself. And so all the religious traditions, the major religious traditions, so all of which teach faith, and faith has to do with our mind, not the sensory perceptions. The five sensory perceptions. So if you could draw satisfaction using your own mind without relying on the sensory perceptions, whether you are rich or poor, educated or uneducated, you'll have a real satisfaction and happiness. Based on such developing our happiness based on this kind of practice is very important, and therefore we need training of mind. For that, we need to understand the workings of mind, the system of emotions and system of mind. And for that, we have the ancient Indian traditions, which have the practice of single-pointed concentration and insight meditation, and therefore we have the extensive explanation of the mind, system of emotions, mind in the ancient Indians system of thought. So, of course, within the religious traditions, amongst the religious traditions, there are those which are mainly based on faith alone to reach their goal, whereas others, such as Buddhism and other traditions in Indian thought, do not emphasize faith alone, but using our intelligence. Whether you are a believer or not, in short, we all do not want suffering, but want happiness. And suffering ensues from our undisciplined mind, this unruly mind. And to tame our mind, the important practice is that of love and compassion. And so this is what we need for all human beings, whether believers or non-believers. And therefore, as a human being, I always feel that I am one of. I always feel that I am one of them. We are same human in the sense of me being human beings. Whether I meet with some leaders or others, I always feel. And so when the other person acts like someone special, like a leader and so forth, then I feel bored sometimes, and then I would say, I'm in a hurry. So it's very important for us to bear this oneness of humanity. I always say that if I emphasize that I'm a Buddhist, I'm Tibetan, and I'm His Holiness the Dalai Lama, especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there's only one Dalai Lama in the whole world, and I would remain just isolated, alone. But because I feel I'm one of the humanity, I am same like other human beings, I have lots of friends around me. Otherwise, if I feel myself to be somebody special as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, then I would be remained alone and I will feel lonely without any friends. And so, I'm very happy to think that I am same like the other person that I meet, such as this President of America. And so with that kind of attitude, you feel close to the other person easily. So if otherwise the other person, for example, the President of America might, if they feel that and consider being the president and to be more important than just being a human being, I don't feel good about that. And so for your own goodness, for your own good and happiness, it's important to feel that the others, you are like other human beings. So whenever I meet others, I laugh or smile. I don't need any introduction of the other person. The other person has two eyes, one nose, one mouth and two ears. And so there's no need for introduction. Just meeting that person with a human face is enough. And therefore I smile and I actually try to be frank with the person. So when you laugh or smile at others, then the other person also responds positively like that. Otherwise, if you remain stern, there's not going to be any positive response from others. I asked school children, which one do you prefer, someone with serious face or someone who smiles? And all the children say, I'm a smiling face.